Good morning and welcome to Rising. We've got another great show for you today. It is Thursday and quite dreary in the nation's capital, but I am here with Niall to brighten the days of our viewers, right?
We will brighten it from these dismal weather conditions to a whole other brighter outlook all across the political spectrum.
Yes.
And so to kick us off in that respect, Robby, what's on your radar?
You're going to like this one, Niall. Conservatives and libertarians, I think, are correct to draw attention to all sorts of reckless spending within the federal government. President Donald Trump has deputized Elon Musk and his Department of Government Efficiency, DOGE, to root out waste, fraud, and abuse. DOGE has recently fixated on the United States Agency for International Development, USAID, which spends billions of dollars on foreign aid to other countries. Foreign aid is a very unpopular category of government spending, even though the American people mistakenly believe that it constitutes a very large proportion of overall spending. It makes sense to more closely scrutinize USAID's activities, for absolute certain. However, some of the critics of USAID have seized on a misleading claim, namely that the organization was funneling millions of dollars to Politico. In reality, it appears that government workers were paying for subscriptions to Politico's premium product. Now, that may or may not be a worthwhile use of government funds. More on that in a moment. But at any rate, it does not represent some kind of direct subsidy to the news outlet. Now, many conservative social media personalities seem to feel differently. On Wednesday, right-wing pundit Benny Johnson, among others, circulated the rumor on X that Politico had received $8 million from USAID. Johnson clearly thought this was a big story. He appended the caption, "Biggest scandal in news media history," with no further qualification. Johnson also speculated that without such funding, Politico would go out of business. Adding fuel to the fire was an apparently unrelated mishap concerning Politico's payment processing services. Due to a technical error, employees of the news website were not paid for the most recent pay period. Kyle Becker, an independent commentator on X, implied that this had something to do with Musk shutting off USAID payments. Suddenly, all the Trump-critical coverage that has appeared at Politico over the years seemed like part of some deep state plot funded by American taxpayers in order to spite the MAGA movement. Quote, "Everything makes sense now," wrote Becker. Fortunately, these theories are based on a little bit of a misunderstanding of how Politico's business model works. First, the $8 million figure represents total government expenditures to Politico since 2016, not USAID dollars specifically. The amount paid by USAID to Politico totals $44,000. A government agency directly transferring cash to a journalistic outlet that's supposed to cover it impartially might still constitute a scandal. In general, the feds should not subsidize journalistic projects. But importantly, USAID was not generously donating the money to Politico. The government paid the money in exchange for subscriptions to Politico's premium content. This is a pretty important difference. USAID is paying for the service Politico provides in much the same way that a government agency has to pay for janitorial services, electricity, or office supplies. If a federal office buys a new printer, that isn't necessarily malicious. It could be malicious if the printer costs too much money or is defective or was purchased as part of some kickback scheme. But the reality that government offices need printers, well, that's not really up for debate. When confronted with these facts, however, many of the conservative social media accounts asserted that something must be awry since $44,000 is still way too much for a Politico subscription. Well, look, that's assuming that USAID is overpaying in exchange for favorable coverage of progressive causes and unfavorable coverage of Trump. But that's not what that agency and other government agencies are actually paying for. In truth, Politico's premium product isn't political news coverage, progressively slanted or otherwise. It's minute-to-minute updates on regulatory decisions that impact specific industries. This is information that political and government agencies need and that Politico supplies for a premium price. As independent journalist Lee Fong points out, Politico isn't the only game in town. Bloomberg and LexisNexis run similar services. Politico's price tag is comparable with theirs. Quote, "Politico provides paywalled pro-subscription services that cost over $10,000 per login for up-to-the-minute detailed reporting on policy decisions and regulations," writes Fong. The 8.1 million in Politico subscriptions referenced above relates to years of subscriptions by agency officials across the government, end quote. Now, these services are clearly valuable. In fact, Republican legislators pay for them too. Customers of Politico services include Representative Lauren Boebert, Representative Elise Stefanik, and even Speaker of the House Mike Johnson. Republicans want their staffers well informed of important policy and legislative updates. Corey Whalen, a communications director for former Libertarian Congressman Justin Amash, notes that it would be both impractical and ultimately more expensive to expect legislative staff to gather the necessary information some other way. In a day and age where subscriptions to news and entertainment products cost individuals in the range of $10 or $20 a month, I understand why people were suspicious of subscription costs in the thousands of dollars. But the pricing tiers for organizations, look, they're simply more expensive. For instance, consider X. I'm a subscriber to the X service. An individual seeking the perks of official verification on X can expect to pay $3, $8, or $22 per month, depending on the desired level of premium access. For business and governments seeking verification, the cost for full access is $10,000 per year. Now, maybe government agencies should be pooling resources more aggressively, like family members all sharing one Netflix account, but that'd be an issue of government efficiency, not some attempt to pay Politico for favorable coverage. None of this, now, by the way, means that either USAID or Politico are blameless entities. It's entirely fair to criticize Politico for slanted coverage. For instance, no outlet is more responsible for foisting on the American people the lie that the Hunter Biden laptop story constituted Russian disinformation. In October of 2020, after the New York Post published the story in question, former national intelligence experts signed an open letter declaring that the laptop resembled Russian disinformation. But Politico went even further, publishing a headline that made this claim much, much more strongly. Hunter Biden's story is Russian disinfo, dozens of former intel officials say. Now, when Joe Biden was asked about the laptop during the subsequent presidential debate, he dismissed it with reference to Politico's false characterization of the letter. This was a massive error on the news outlet's part, but it is not explained by some secret financial payoff on the part of USAID.
Good radar, Robby. You were quite right in predicting that. I do indeed agree with all of that, I think. I mean, I think it is to your credit, seriously, that from a right-leaning perspective, you're willing to call out the fact that the stuff that's been put out is simply not true. It's an obvious misrepresentation. And even the idea about subsidizing things. You know, people are no more subsidizing Politico by buying a subscription than someone at Goldman Sachs is subsidizing Bloomberg by subscribing to the terminal. They are paying for a service that is provided. And in this particular case, it is part of obvious reasons that people need information to do their jobs. That's the price of the subscription. People can argue that one way or another, but that's what the price is. Now, here's the thing that worries me, among other things. This has gone so far that Trump now is, I was going to say tweeting, he's writing on Truth Social about it, in fact. And he's talking about the fact that the left-wing rag known as Politico seems to have received $8 million. He goes on to say this could be the biggest scandal of them all, perhaps the biggest in history.
That's what Benny Johnson said too. Yeah.
Yeah, Elon Musk saying similar things. So
people are really, really getting over their skis on this one. And if conservatives are to maintain their credibility in finding areas of government spending to cut, which I do think is important, and I think there are all sorts of things USAID was spending money on that it should not be spending money on, and that's fine, but we have to be proceeding from the same basic set of facts. And I think people who were jumping to criticize this also didn't quite understand what the subscription is for. The information in the premium packet is again, minute-to-minute updates on regulatory decisions that are coming down. The congressional staff want access to, right, so they can advise their member, even from the conservative standpoint. That comm staffer I cited, Corey Whalen, she worked for Justin Amash, who's a libertarian Republican before that. They want to know so they can brief their member and say, okay, you want legislation to, it could be a conservative thing, to cut government, to do any of these things, but they need that information. And then other people are well, isn't that their job? Shouldn't they be getting that information? That would cost them more to do that service in office.
Right. No, I agree with that, but I think our one point of differentiation here is that it seems that you think the Benny Johnson type people were from a conservative perspective, but genuinely mistaken. I am not at all so convinced of their sort of good faith. I think this is actually fake news in the way that term used to be used, deliberately spun up news. And I think it is people using, in a rather cunning and disingenuous way, a claim that I think they're too smart to actually believe, as a way to gin up outrage and to draw attention. And it has now spun out of control to the point where we have the President of the United States writing about it on social media.
Yeah, gotta gin up outrage over things that are actually outrageous.
Yes,
is
exactly.
What I would advise my friends on the right to do. Coming up, we'll discuss Nancy Mace's latest outbursts in Congress. Stay tuned. Another day, another confrontational congressional hearing. Things took a turn during a House Oversight Committee hearing on right-sizing government.
It all started with Republican Congresswoman Nancy Mace's comments criticizing USAID. Here she is.
USAID awarded $2 million to strengthen trans-led organizations to deliver gender-affirming health care in Guatemala. So to each of you this morning, does this advance the interests of American citizens paying for in Guatemala to the tune of $2 million? Yes or no? Governor?
Ranking member of the Oversight Committee, Jerry Connolly, not surprisingly took issue with what Mace had to say.
And that's when things got a little bit heated. Check it out.
Mr. Chairman, parliamentary inquiry.
Yes, sir.
The gentlelady has used a phrase that is considered a slur in the LGBTQ community and the transgender community. And let me please finish without interruption. And
I don't really care. You want penises in women's bathrooms, and I'm not going to have it.
Okay.
No, thank you.
Let
It's disgusting.
the gentleman state his parliamentary inquiry.
And I would just ask the chairman that she be counseled that we ought not to be engaged. We can have debate and policy discussion without offending human beings who are our fellow citizens.
Mr. Chairman, I'm not going to be counseled by a man over men and women's spaces or men who have mental health issues dressing as women. I'm not being counseled by some guy.
My inquiry is to
over
the
this.
chairman,
Okay.
Mr. Chairman.
Order. The inquiry is about decorum. Decorum is at the discretion of the chair.
That's
I will be
mansplaining,
honest,
Mr. Chairman.
with the ranking member. I'm not up to date on my politically correct LGBTQ terminology. We'll look into that.
Meanwhile, President Donald Trump signed an executive order banning transgender athletes from women's sports.
Here's the president yesterday.
With this executive order, the war on women's sports is over. Under the Trump administration, we will defend the proud tradition of female athletes, and we will not allow men to beat up, injure, and cheat our women and our girls. From now on, women's sports will be only for women.
The NCAA released a statement writing, quote, "The NCAA Board of Governors is reviewing the executive order and will take necessary steps to align NCAA policy in the coming days, subject to further guidance from the administration."
According to NCAA President Charlie Baker, of the 510,000 college athletes, less than 10 publicly say they're transgender. Reacting to the Mace incident, journalist Kara Swisher wrote on Blue Sky, "Nancy Mace needs help and then needs to be shown the exit."
CNN journalist Andy Kaczynski tweeted, CNN's pollster Harry Enton found that 79% of Americans oppose transgender athletes in female sports yesterday, including 67% of Democrats. To which international security professor Max Abrams responded, "The push for transgender athletes competing in female sports is basically an elite liberal phenomenon, out of step with Americans, including Democrats." So two things here. The first is the Trump executive order. I don't even know that I care for the federal government to weigh in on this at all, but having men and keeping sex-segregated sports is in fact like an 80-20 issue, and there's no doubt this is very popular, and I actually don't even hear very many Democrats defending it on the merits. They'll say, well, this is an important issue, or this is not an important issue. This affects a very small number of people. The that it affects a very small number of people always cuts both ways to me, because, well, it's not like there's this massive number of athletes being disenfranchised by this, and still, even if there were only 10, if because of the advantage given to the accrues to biological males, like if they win every event, even if there's a small number of them, like that still matters to everyone else. So I don't really get that argument. Now, that's separate from Nancy Mace's antics. We bleeped the word. I don't know that it's a word you have to bleep. I guess I won't say it because we bleeped it. I don't know that it's a
very
strong
common
word.
Well, it's a very commonly known slur or term or derogatory term.
Derogatory
transgender
term.
people.
Yeah, I've never understood that. Like, it's so bad you have to bleep it or can't say it. But it was mean-spirited the way she said it, and I don't know what good that does anyone. And I would like a little bit more. Like, this isn't a wrestling show. It's not reality TV. If she could just rein it in a little bit, would be nice.
Absolutely. I mean, I thought that her thing was kind of schoolyard behavior and kind of bullying sort of behavior as well. I mean, trying to poke fun at people by using a slur and using it in this rather juvenile way of just like repeating the word, like some kid who's been told to not say a word by her parents and keeps saying it again and again. I also think in her case it's particularly dubious because at one time in her career she was actually, by Republican standards at least, fairly socially progressive, including on LGBTQ issues. And she said back in 2021 that she supported equality for everybody and was actually the co-sponsor of a bill that would have provided a special office within the Department of Veterans Affairs for LGBTQ people. So therefore I think there's also the suspicion that it's very performative. A while back she famously was photographed she had the bill to ban transgender women from women's bathrooms in the Capitol, and then she posted a photograph of herself from her social media accounts she'd written biological on a piece of paper or piece of card and held it above the woman sign for the bathrooms. And it's like, okay, what are we doing here? I mean, it's very reality TV show-ish.
Yes, and I actually would say she has not endeared herself to all conservatives. There are a lot of social conservatives who don't trust her whatsoever for the reasons you're pointing out. She tweeted a photo of her in she had military service or something of that nature, in her military uniform, saying like, this is why I fight to keep men and women, or fight against the transgender movement or something. And like a lot of Matt Walsh, Daily Wire type social conservatives were like, no, you're just as bad. We don't think women should be in the armed forces. So you're a faux conservative anyway.
Wow. Okay.
So she is actually not liked by social conservatives.
I mean, I get that they consider her kind of basically fraudulent. I obviously wouldn't go towards the banning women from the armed services or whatever that view is. I find that view absurd, but I get that people, and I share skepticism about her bona fides. In relation to the Trump thing, I mean, it is, I think, much more defensible to have some sort of bar on people competing in adolescent or adult sports in ways that are aligning with their gender identity rather than their sex at birth. You and I have discussed this a number of times before. I mean, there are just physical differences, particularly that manifest from adolescence onwards. People who were born male have advantages in terms of strength and speed, typically in general terms, over people who were born female. And I think the problem for people who argue for trans participation in competitive sports is that it seems to so much of the population that they're arguing for something unfair, shrouded in the kind of language of social progress, because lots of people don't think either, if they're their daughters or sisters or women themselves should be competing against people who appear to have that kind of advantage.
Up next, finally, the unedited Harris interview from 60 Minutes has been released. We'll discuss. The FCC has finally released the unedited version of CBS's 60 Minutes interview with Kamala Harris.
President Donald Trump launched a lawsuit against the network in the final days of the presidential campaign. He argued that CBS's editing of a Harris response had given her an unfair advantage.
The issue started when two different portions of Harris's answer to a question about Israel were aired on 60 Minutes and Face the Nation.
Face the Nation aired a longer answer, which Trump criticized, than 60 Minutes did.
So we'll let you see for yourself. First, here's the edited version.
But it seems that Prime Minister Netanyahu is not listening.
We are not going to stop pursuing what is necessary for the United States to be clear about where we stand on the need for this war to end.
And here's the unedited version.
But it seems that Prime Minister Netanyahu is not listening. The Wall Street Journal said that that your administration has repeatedly been blindsided by Netanyahu. And in fact, he has rebuffed just about all of your administration's entreaties.
Well, Bill, the work that we have done has resulted in a number of movements in that region by Israel that were very much prompted by or a result of many things, including our advocacy for what needs to happen in the region. And we're not going to stop doing that. We are not going to stop pursuing what is necessary for the United States to be clear about where we stand on the need for this war to end.
Trump responded to the release, writing in part, CBS and 60 Minutes defrauded the public by doing something which has never to this extent been seen before. CBS should lose its license and the cheaters at 60 Minutes should all be thrown out and this disreputable news show should be immediately terminated. Here's Trump critiquing Harris's answer during the campaign trail.
60 Minutes, she interviews. She was so bad. She gave an answer. This never happened to me. Why does it happen? She gave an answer that was so bad that they changed it. They took it out.
So there it is, the edited and unedited version. So for my money, I do think they should not have edited it that way and showed that answer.
Really?
I don't think either answer is particularly good. It's a lot of word salad, not saying anything substantive, not addressing the question in a satisfying way at all. I do think she looked a little bit more decisive in the edited version, and that ends up, if you watch the whole thing, she looks like she's having a harder time trying to come up with a response to the question. So do I think the editing was good? No. Do I think it's something you can sue over? They can make that choice. I think it's fair to needle them and say, yeah, I think I wouldn't say wholly misrepresented. I think you made it look a little bit more favorable to her than it was before, the awkward pauses, etc. But there's nothing to sue over.
I actually disagree with your characterization of it. I thought that her answers in both cases were average, unexceptional. I'm, as you're well aware, not a big defender of the Biden-Harris administration's policies in that part of the
Also,
world.
because it's just impossible to defend. It was clear Netanyahu was not
Was
interested
ignoring
in doing what the U.S. wanted, what
Right.
Biden was telling him to do,
Right.
and she couldn't say that, so she just didn't know what to say.
Right, but to the point about editing, I think the editing did not change or alter the characterization of her point. It took away pauses, yes, but in any network TV program in particular, you're under very serious pressure for time. Everyone understands that it is not going to be run in its entirety, that it is an edited version which condenses answers, and you need to do that in a way that doesn't misrepresent what the person said. I think CBS obviously did that. I don't think they've anything to apologize for. I also think, related to this, that Trump was making the kind of ludicrously exaggerated claims he was making to simply create the impression of unfairness, working the refs, as they would say in football, that it is an attempt to just paint the media as biased against him with no real substance, but he knows that his supporters are ever eager to lap that stuff up, and so it was another attempt to do it.
Yeah, I don't agree with Trump's characterization, but even so, when you cut, you have to condense an interview, I get it, but when you cut out, instead of just cutting on one side or the other, but cut from the middle, I mean, they shortened the question, too, to Harris. So, she could have complained if she didn't like how she sounded that, well, that's not the full question that he asked. When you're cutting in between, he says something, and then he said something else, and you took that part out, and then you show her answer, and you cut out what she said at first, you start to run into risks. And I think it can be dangerous to do that. Do I think this is the most egregious case of it ever? No. But even, the decisions to take out the pauses, well, everybody sounds smarter if you do that. I mean, that could be for Joe Biden. They stopped taking the pauses out when they really wanted to show him the door at the end of when the media turned on him. But you could edit his responses where you took out the pauses and he would sound more coherent. And I would say that, well, that's not representing him accurately. Again, I'm not saying this is the worst thing ever done, or I think it merits I wouldn't have done it that way kind of reaction, not this shows, the pernicious bias of CBS. Because as you point out, she didn't come out looking good anyway. If they're trying to make her sound good, maybe that was an impossible task, but they could have edited it more aggressively.
Yeah, I just find the implication that CBS has been mendacious or biased kind of ludicrous in this instance. I think the taking pauses out is done in lots of interviews and would just be seen in normal journalistic times as cleaning up an answer, and that is done frequently for time reasons and for succinctness reasons and to try to get the point made as fast as possible. I do not see it as some effort to aid Kamala Harris. Even if Trump wants to make that argument, I note that he, for a start, refused to do a 60 Minutes interview. If we're talking about word salad, we could be here all day citing Trump speeches or remarks in which he made basically no sense. And furthermore, to go that extra step that he goes and argue that CBS should lose its license. I mean, that's just an absurd.
Yeah, we don't agree with that. But this is why podcasts are the future. No editing, hours of talking, you just hear, you don't have any thumb on the scales kind of editing. There is a value to that format.
There is, but just finally, Robby, one point that I do want to make on this segment is that I think that the worry from a journalistic perspective is also about corporate bosses bending the knee. Paramount, CBS's parent company, is trying to expedite a merger with Skydance. There's some suggestion that they're going to settle Trump's suit to do that. We've already seen the Washington Post back out of the endorsement at Jeff Bezos's behest. We have seen ABC settle a defamation suit that they probably could have survived or at least had a much lower award in. Facebook's a different thing, but at abandoning fact-checking. I think there's generally that fear that corporations are wanting to cozy up to this president to the detriment of legitimate journalism.
Well, if all it is releasing the unedited transcript or the unedited interview, I think that's okay. I don't think suing media outlets is generally the right way to go, even when the coverage, I agree, is unfair or biased. Private individuals, private companies have the right to characterize things in ways that I think are false, unless it really does cross the line into libel or slander, as you can argue it did in the George Stephanopoulos case, or they argued it did, and that's why they chose to settle. But we shall see. Next up, Joe Rogan is fighting back at Kamala Harris, a book about Kamala Harris, a book about the campaign, claiming that it was on him that the interview didn't take place. He's saying that is not fair at all. Stay tuned. The saga of the interview that never was is still not over.
Podcaster Joe Rogan is responding to an excerpt of a book called Fight: Inside the Wildest Battle for the White House by Jonathan Allen and Amy Parnes.
Here's Rogan trying to set the record straight.
They never committed to doing the show. So all this talk, there was another thing they said that the reason why they did the Beyonce thing, the Beyonce event in Houston, was so that they could be in Texas to do my show. They never agreed to do the show. None of that's true. They never agreed. They also said that they sent someone down here to the studio to do a walkthrough of the set. That's not true. The Trump administration did. I wanted to release both of them on the same day. This was my goal. I was even trying to figure out if there was a way that I could do it, and I even offered to do it late that night. So the night that Trump came on, I'm like, what if we do her, like when she's done in Texas, if she came here? But no one ever committed to doing it. This is like really important because they keep pretending that I lied or I did this or I did that. They never committed to doing it. So this whole idea that we f***ed her over and then we f***ed her over for Trump, incorrect, just not true.
The Hill published an excerpt of the book last month. In a nutshell, the book lays out the alleged back and forth between Team Harris and Team Rogan. Rogan's hard lines were that Harris had to come to Austin, Texas, and that no topic could be off limits. The book says that Harris's team struggled to find a reason to get her to Texas, Rogan alluded to that in the clip, since it was apparent she would lose the state in the presidential election.
The book also claims that Harris's deputy campaign manager, Rob Flaherty, proposed that the interview be on Friday, October 25th. The problem, however, was that Rogan had said he had a personal day. What about Saturday morning? Flaherty countered. Only if it's before 8:30 a.m., came the tough reply.
Here's what the book says went down after. The tone is different, Flaherty thought. The Vice President of the United States is offering to come to your effing show, and you keep putting up more hoops. Harris's team still wanted to make it work, but a new wariness set in. On October 22nd, the same day the Harris camp announced the rally, the Associated Press reported that Trump would be Rogan's guest on Friday, the personal day Rogan had originally reserved.
Notorious left-wing journalist wrote on Blue Sky, this is Taylor Lorenz, I'm inclined to believe Rogan given the Harris campaign's hostile attitude toward creators who didn't appear 100% on board with the campaign and its messaging. And I doubt Taylor Lorenz would side with Joe Rogan easily.
This is a rare moment of unanimity around an opinion expressed by Taylor Lorenz.
Yes, I too would side with Joe Rogan on this one, having exhaustively litigated who said what, where, and why.
Right.
It does not particularly seem like Kamala Harris's team went out of their way to make sure this happened. If they prioritized making this happen, it would have happened.
Well,
Rogan has said he's willing to do it. And now he wanted her to come there. For one of the other podcasts she did, she had them build her an entire new set for that podcast where it was more convenient.
Yeah.
He wasn't going to do that. The idea that she couldn't come to Texas, well, she was nearby Texas, or if not in Texas itself. For the
Well, that was the suggestion, I think, in the book, that they'd arranged this rally that did have some people scratching their heads because, as we noted in the introduction, she was never going to win Texas, and there was this rally, and the suggestion is that that had been scheduled to give her an excuse to be
don't
in
tell
the
Nomiki
vicinity.
that. Nomiki thought Kamala Harris was going to carry Texas. So
I'm not even going to go.
Believers out there.
I'm not going to get into that morass at all. So let's not do that. But what I would say is, look, it makes no sense that Joe Rogan was trying to, in some sense, block Kamala Harris from coming on his podcast. Any of us who are in the media, broadcasting, podcasting, any other kind of business, want the biggest name guests, the most news-making guests that we can get. And the idea that Joe Rogan was erecting hurdles to prevent Kamala Harris come on his podcast is pretty ludicrous.
That comms person, Rob Flaherty, who is quoted in that book, that is a figure from the Biden White House. I will always remember his name because he is the one who sent some of the emails that were so controversial in terms of pressuring social media companies to take down content. He was one of the people screaming at either Facebook or Twitter that, like, I can't believe this RFK Jr. tweet is still up, or this Alex Berenson tweet, or whatever it was, some COVID descending thing. He was the one most militantly hectoring to the companies from the office of the White House that they had to do something to take down the content. So I am not
a fan there.
Not a huge fan of him, and interesting to see him making this appearance in defense of Kamala's failure to go on Joe Rogan, which we've talked about pretty exhaustively. But I do think really maybe it didn't. If it didn't hurt her, it's reflective of a strategy that held her back, a strategy of not doing enough independent content creators. We see how this benefited Trump doing all of these podcasts that speak to have disproportionately younger audiences, male audiences. The right, MAGA, is doing a lot better with young men in particular, but young people of various ethnic identities, depolarizing that, because he spoke to them on these platforms that have massive followings, and that was part of a really successful strategy that Kamala Harris just mostly, not entirely, but mostly ignored.
And I think it's actually broader than that, although that's for sure a part of it. I think one of the difficulties with the Harris campaign was it was characterized by a degree of caution that was, I think, excessive, because then you end up blocking people from seeing anything that feels authentic. I think we're in a moment now where that authenticity does, in fact, matter. It sometimes can be an overused word, but the reluctance to be unscripted or to venture into unorthodox areas, I think is a problem. I said, previously about the Trump Joe Rogan interview, one of the most interesting stretches in it to me was when Trump and Rogan were just talking about UFC and boxing, and it was basically two people shooting the breeze about something you wouldn't expect to hear Trump talk about. It wasn't that he said anything revelatory, it was that the nature of the exchange was interesting in and of itself. Kamala Harris has, generally speaking, I think, in the campaign, been unwilling to do that.
You characterize her media strategy as cautious, and I very much agree. But caution never made sense for her, given that she was behind the entire time. Slightly behind at points, or basically even, but her own internal polling, her people have said, yeah, we always thought she was behind. We always thought it was going to be a tough sell. We didn't think we thought it was at best a 50-50, but we were a little bit behind. That's what they said the whole time. Okay, then why this cautious strategy? That betrays then just a lack of faith in your candidate, that they would make the most of those opportunities.
I agree. Well, I do know, though, how she could put all of this right, which is private citizen Kamala Harris could just go on Joe Rogan.
Yeah,
that'd be great.
Yeah, that would be that would be fascinating.
It would, actually.
I think she does intend. I increasingly get a feeling that she is not done.
No,
she has an interest in remaining relevant and perhaps running for president again, which I did not immediately have on my bingo card, but that's the feeling I'm getting.
Yeah, and there's quite a lot of talk, as you know, about her perhaps running to be governor of California, because Gavin Newsom's term limited out next time around. So Governor Harris in a pole position to be a Democratic nominee again.
Wanting to do the actual work of being a governor. I would not want that in her shoes. More coming up next on Rising. Please stay with us. Former Secretary of State Hillary Clinton has inserted herself into the news cycle.
She got into a back and forth with Transportation Secretary Sean Duffy.
It all started when Duffy tweeted, "Big news, talk to the Doge team. They're going to plug in to help our aviation system."
Clinton then responded, "They have no relevant experience. Most of them aren't old enough to rent a car. And you're going to let them mess with airline safety that's already deteriorated on your watch?"
Duffy then hit back, writing on X, "Madam Secretary, with all due respect, experienced Washington bureaucrats are the reason our nation's infrastructure is crumbling. You need to sit this one out."
And Clinton took it a step further, writing, "US airlines had gone 16 years without fatal crashes. Then MAGA fired the FAA chief, gutted the Aviation Security Advisory Committee, and threatened air traffic controllers with layoffs. Now there have been 2 fatal crashes. Hope your unvetted 22-year-olds fix things fast."
Well, look, I don't think it is fair to jump in there and attribute to these crashes and say that's the result of FAA changes being made, just as you, Niall, objected to saying immediately, well, it's DEI or it's because they changed the testing procedures 10 years ago. We don't know yet what was the cause of these crashes. I have paid less attention to the one in Philadelphia. The one here in D.C., from the information we have gathered so far, sounds like there were a lot of concerns about this air traffic corridor being very, very crowded. People who fly helicopters have been warning that this is so dangerous to have the number of planes you have landing and taking off at Reagan while having a lane, an airspace lane for helicopters as well. At night with all the lights that are on the sides of the river, it's just very dangerous. It sounds like that might have been some negligence there to not consider that, but whether that specifically has to, that's been a long-running problem. It has to do with changes that got implemented by Trump in the couple weeks he's had some power over governance. That doesn't seem fair to me.
No, I think that is correct. I think that this is part of a broad pattern that sadly we see so many times when there's a dramatic or tragic event, which is that people rush in and say, aha, see, this proves that my pre-existing belief was correct, or my pre-existing belief explains why this thing has happened. I have seen zero compelling evidence that DEI had anything to do with the crash in Washington. Like you, just by virtue of geographic location, I have been watching that story more closely than the tragic events in Philadelphia. But anyway, the point is I've seen no evidence that DEI was responsible. I've seen no evidence that firing the FAA chief or winding down this advisory safety board was responsible. So in that sense, I don't think it's terribly helpful to try to sort of squeeze really awful, sad events into a pre-existing ideological frame. On a practical, non-ideological sense, there is a persistent question about air traffic control staffing levels. Whether that affected either of these two instances, I don't think we can say definitively. I do think that just on a basic practical level, we have to be concerned about the fact that those shortages have existed for so long. The union that represents air traffic controllers talking about the fact that about 4 in 10 of their members are working 60-hour weeks to try to keep pace with demand. I don't think anybody sensible thinks it's a great idea for air traffic controllers to be working 60-hour weeks.
Yeah, and we want the right amount of safety oversight. You know, this board that got nuked, a component of it is TSA type stuff.
Right, security.
Which I have,
sense.
complained about for a long time. I find TSA security to be very, very heavy-handed and expensive and creates a lot of inefficiencies in the airport, in my view, and the views of actually a lot of experts who've looked at the situation, without actually adding much to safety.
This is the security theater.
The security theater, the failure to properly, there's exhaustive screening being done for, hairspray bottles and tweezers and things like that, they miss it. Whenever they get tested, somebody tries to actually smuggle something through dangerous, they miss it. That's one. Two, there are serious questions about whether you even had these things. You could actually construct a device to take over a plane. I mean, we have to remember hijackings occurred. 9/11 occurred at a time where the default, when the operating procedure for a plane being hijacked was to let the hijacking happen, because no one had ever thought to fly a plane into a building before. The cockpit doors, you could actually take over the cockpit. Now the cockpit door is locked. That one innovation does a tremendous amount of good in terms of making it impossible to actually take over the plane. So I have serious questions about whether people could, and the things like, you remember the guy with the, what was it, his underpants or his shoe or
the
something?
underwear bomber.
Like that was not going to do anything to damage the plane. So anyway, I think it is a lot of expensive theater that does not enhance safety. There's even arguments it undermines safety because a certain number of people every year choose to drive a long distance rather than fly because it's become so onerous, and more people die in car crashes, vastly more, infinitely more in car crashes than plane crashes. So not everything being done in the name of safety is always worthwhile and necessary. That's my one caution. Now, of course, we need to have air traffic controllers who are getting enough sleep and are well compensated and are able to do the job, and we should investigate whether that had something to do with what's going on here. Right. But you could always add more layers of nominal safety at great cost without necessarily getting anything beneficial out of it.
Well, sure, absolutely. But I think the TSA argument and the air traffic controller argument are two separate things. I know, and anyone who flies with any frequency knows, even in terms of the airport security, there's often a lot of inconsistency between different airports. Oh, I have to take this out of my bag now. I was able to take it through at the airport that I departed from.
That's what I love when you asked, is this one of the times where I got to take my laptop out?
Right.
And then they bark at you like you're insane for asking that question. But it's different from line to line.
Right, exactly. So all of that stuff, I think, undercuts confidence in that system. That, though, is different from air traffic controllers. And I noticed that in this current federal buyout, the deadline for which occurs later today, there seems to be some confusion. Sean Duffy, who is featuring in these tweets, has said that people who are involved in, I believe his phrase is critical safety, at the among airport and transportation authorities will not be offered that. But the union that represents most air traffic controllers say they have not been told that the offer has been rescinded to their members. So there is some confusion about whether people could take buyouts even when we have the shortage that I mentioned earlier on. I think that's an absolutely valid topic to debate and valid topic to critique, even though I would be wary of drawing a direct line of causation to Washington and Philadelphia.
Stay tuned, more Rising right after this. These are some really dark days for the Democrats.
So much so that some took to the streets to protest what they call Elon Musk's hostile takeover.
But even the mainstream media was openly mocking these paltry resistance efforts. CNN aired this short clip from yesterday outside the Department of the Treasury. Let's watch.
To our Republican colleagues, if you do not see the light, we will bring the fire. Resist!
We are going to be in your face. We are going to be on your asses.
We have days to stop the destruction of our democracy. We have work to do. Tell Elon Musk to take his hands off your money. We don't pledge allegiance to the creepy 22-year-olds working for Elon Musk. We pledge allegiance to the United States of America.
And goddamn it, shut down the city! We are at war!
We will win! We will win!
Then even CNN panelists couldn't hold back.
Gretchen.
Yes,
So,
they need the Democrats need a real leader, okay? They need a real leader, which currently does not exist.
Late night also had a blast. Here's Jimmy Kimmel.
Oh, we are so
we are doomed. All these old men. Look at who we have running this country.
Jon Stewart also took a dig at the Democrats, particularly this Democrat.
Democrats, can you please stop trotting Schumer out there every time Trump traverses into the unreal? He's not good at this. What is the decision-making process here? Hey, who should we get out there to effectively battle one of the most savvy presidential media manipulators in history? Oh, I don't know. How about Schumer? He's uninteresting, but at least he's monotone. Oh, wait, and Chuck, before you go out there, you look too young. Put on these readers and lower them on your nose. Perfect. Honestly, listening to Chuck Schumer speak on almost any topic makes me want to bomb Canada.
Press Secretary Caroline Leavitt, White House Press Secretary that is, said this about the incident. Let's watch.
If you heard that type of violent, enticing rhetoric from our side of the aisle, from Republican leaders on Capitol Hill, I think there would be a lot more outrage in this room today. It's unacceptable, the comments that have been made by these Democrat leaders, and frankly, they don't even know what they're talking about. Because President Trump was elected with a mandate from the American people to make this government more efficient. He campaigned across this country with Elon Musk, vowing that Elon was going to head up the Department of Government Efficiency, and the two of them, with a great team around them, were going to look at the receipts of this federal government and ensure it's accountable to American taxpayers. That's all that is happening here, and for Democrat officials to incite violence and encourage Americans to take to the streets is incredibly alarming, and they should be held accountable for that rhetoric.
Tim Ryan, the former Democratic congressman from Ohio, wrote on X, "I just don't even know what to say anymore when I see this kind of stuff. Is it Saturday Night Live or real life? Does anyone really think this is the future of the country? This is the only alternative to Trump's America? It's just so depressing." Poor Tim Ryan, pretty depressed.
Very depressed. Democratic leaders, the people we saw joining the protesters, they don't have, I'm going to use a young people term, Niall, they're lacking riz.
They are lacking riz. Certainly Chuck Schumer is not Mr. Riz.
It's just pathetic. I mean, we could talk about overall the lack of street protesters right now in general for what's going on. Now, there were some protests yesterday, but they were very small affairs. Is really an interesting development. I think it has to do with how just demoralized, not even just because not all Democrats are going to go out and march in the street, but the kind of people who go out and march in the street, left-wing or left activist type people, seem totally broken apart or don't think that's an effective strategy or have no interest in doing it anymore. It really speaks to the decline of Occupy Wall Street type energy. I think it's just been long enough that it's dissipated or it doesn't have a natural leader. You know, Bernie Sanders is still on the political scene, but he's nearing retirement. There isn't an obvious, there are a couple of people who could succeed that mantle, but it's, you know, still being worked out. And then broadly, more broadly speaking, for the Democratic Party, yes, it is a problem that there is no de facto leader right now because of the way I think that Kamala Harris came into the nomination being switched out at the last minute, deprived her of a kind of party mandate. But now she is the de facto leader, but she was not chosen by the voters to that position. So it's just a kind of confusing times where you have people like Chuck Schumer maybe in the interim playing that role, but lacking the kind of media savvy is a good way to put it.
Yeah, I think there are a couple of issues there. I think one of the reasons there haven't been such protests this time around was that it simply wasn't a massive shock that Trump won. In 2016, the vast majority of liberals and a large swathe of the rest of the country expected Hillary Clinton to win.
Donald Trump expected Hillary Clinton to win. He said that.
Right, and then she didn't, and he won. And so in that shock and in that shift, there was a lot of energy on the Democratic or progressive side. Last November, everyone understood, I think, that Trump had at least a 50-50 chance of winning. And furthermore, there was not a great affection, really, for President Biden and his record. Back in 2016, it was coming out of Obama. He's a very revered figure in the Democratic constituency generally. Joe Biden had never really measured up to that. So I think that's part of the reason why there's not such sort of protest underway. Look, I'm not going to defend, Chuck Schumer rather feebly leading that kind of rant. Jon Stewart was very funny about it. Jimmy Kimmel, people who are clearly have no fondness for Republicans.
Yeah, I rarely laugh at Jimmy Kimmel, and I don't always laugh at Jon Stewart, but that was some funny stuff.
I don't mind Kimmel, but perhaps he's more in line with my worldview than he is with yours. But I do think, and here's the sort of serious point where I think we maybe, well, I'm pretty sure we disagree. Yes, that protest is laughable and risible and embarrassing in lots of ways. The problem, I think, is when the coverage then all becomes about the protest, not about Elon Musk's acolytes getting access to this massive treasury payment system, where they get into a system that is responsible for about $5 trillion of payouts. A lot of it is shrouded in secrecy and mystery and contention. There is certainly the idea that they may be able to have access to people's bank accounts. There's a legal case about it where people are arguing that it amounts to unlawful disclosure of private information. So there is a really serious issue here that gets lost if we just spend all our time talking about the superficial failures of the protests.
Some of these legal issues are going to have to be looked at by courts, maybe even the Supreme Court for certain. I'm broadly supportive of what Elon Musk is trying to do with downsizing the federal government and getting rid of some agencies. However, it has to be done in accordance with the Constitution. Can the federal government can the executive decide just not to spend money that Congress has determined that has authorized the spending of? That actually ends up being a tricky question because we didn't quite envision how this would all work out when the country was being founded, and there have been numerous cases where the executive just doesn't want to do the thing the legislature has approved the funding for, or vice versa. Overall, our Congress, or not this Congress specifically, but Congress as a branch has delegated more and more of the actual task of governing to the executive. Now we have a case where Congress and the executive are from the same party. The majority in Congress wants to do whatever Trump wants. That said, I would use this moment. I would advise Trump and Elon and the MAGA movement, you actually control Congress right now. If you want to make these fundamental changes to the size of government, write laws that back them up and get them passed so that then it's set in stone, or reasonable stone, that this can happen. If you're just going to do it all via executive fiat or a private citizen, it's going to invite court challenges, and that may not hold up. So doing this and then doing it through the legislative process should be a key priority. And I don't see I'm a little dismayed by not seeing more action from Congress. Like, you got to back up Trump on this if you want this stuff to happen.
I think that all of those are valid points. I think that where I tend to focus, though, is on the specifics of Elon Musk, who spent well over $200 million to get Donald Trump elected, who has about 20 billion in contracts of his various business interests with the federal government. And so the capacity for double dealing or for using his political power for his business success or for his rival's business failure seems very considerable to me. I noticed that there's a Democratic congressman from Wisconsin, Mark Pocan, who has now introduced something called the Elon Musk Act. It has no chance of passing, of course, because it's a Republican Congress, but his point is that people with these big federal contracts shouldn't have the special status that Elon Musk had. A special government employee, I think is the terminology for it, where you're a political appointee who has clearances or has the authority to look at all this stuff and to find out stuff that would plainly benefit your business interests. I think that's very dodgy indeed.
Lots more to discuss today on Rising. Stay with us. Does Jimmy Kimmel agree with President Trump? On Jimmy Kimmel Live this week, the host had this to say about Canada. Let's watch.
Let's just imagine for a second that somehow they do make this happen and Canada does become a state. Do they think it would be a red state? There are 41 million people living in Canada. They're about the same number we have in California. California has 54 electoral votes. If Canada also had 54 electoral votes, forget MAGA. Our next president will be a kind-hearted lesbian moose. Okay? I think I'm trying to say I'm for it. Save us, Canada. You're our only hope.
And this is what Kimmel had to say about Canada's concessions. Let's watch.
Under President Trump, our allies will be reiterating in their boots from now on. Next, his plan is he's going to force France to give us the Statue of Liberty. Won't that be nice? The art of the deal. Trump's calling this a major victory, and he's sending his minions out to claim it for him.
President Trump posted on Truth Social after Prime Minister Justin Trudeau agreed to beef up border security. Canada has agreed to ensure we have a secure northern border and to finally end the deadly scourge of drugs like fentanyl that have been pouring into our country. I am very pleased with this initial outcome, and the tariffs announced on Saturday will be paused for a 30-day period to see whether or not final economic deal with Canada can be structured. Fairness for all.
Always like to see you breaking out the Trump impersonation, Robby. Good times.
I'm just trying it 30%. 30%
well,
Trump.
That's
never go full Trump.
Never go full Trump. That's a good rule for us all. So for the second time during today's show, I assume you enjoyed what Jimmy Kimmel had to say.
I did. Kind-hearted lesbian moose is lovely imagery. I do take his point, and I have counseled conservatives on this. We can't add Canada as the 51st state because then we will add a bunch of electoral votes.
Be like giving electoral votes. Be like giving senators to the District of Columbia or something.
Yeah, we can't have that either. This is a delicate balance of power here. It can't happen unless you added unless it's true that everyone in Greenland is actually MAGA, and we can add Greenland too. Then we could add DC statehood or Puerto Rico or whatever.
If Canada was politically, Oklahoma, would you be all in favor of annexing Canada?
Then annex them, yes.
Oh,
yes.
Lord.
Manifest destiny. From sea to shining sea.
You just want those extra Republican electoral college votes, Robby.
So much.
Whatever about the freedom and autonomy of the proud nation of Canada.
No. Well, no. We, in all seriousness, we don't want to conquer anybody. We don't want to deploy the military. I don't think Trump wants to do that either. He keeps talking about world peace. I think it is good to have better economic relationships with our neighbor to the north and our neighbor to the south, and even Greenland and Panama. Make sure we're not getting ripped off or anything like that. That's all fine. If people in other countries want to be part of the great American economic engine and trade with us and have good relations with us and treat us well, that's great. That's what we want to happen. It doesn't need to involve conquest or actually making them a state or anything of that nature, but that is good to counter the growing influence of China, which is a danger to global stability.
Yeah, I mean, in the abstract, I don't disagree with that. I do think that there's a propensity among the MAGA people in particular to overestimate the enthusiasm of non-US populations for joining up with the United States. There was a poll taken in
They'll greet us as liberators.
It was about they will not do anything of the kind. I think there was a poll taken in Greenland where, if I remember recalling correctly, it was 18% or something had some interest in becoming part of the United States. Look, obviously in the more serious or sober-minded elements of this. Yes, I agree that it is better to have good relations than bad relations with neighbours to the north and south and elsewhere. Look, it is the Canadian, Trump's supposed victory with Canada over the threat of tariffs was largely the Canadians reiterating what they had already agreed to do. So a lot of it was about optics rather than any substantive change.
As long as we don't actually implement the tariffs, I'm happy, because I didn't want the tariffs to go into effect because they were going to raise prices. So, you know, Trump using tariffs as a diplomatic tool, you can argue that Canada didn't really, promise anything more than what it already said. Mexico did come more to the bargaining table. I think you have to concede that it was not unsuccessful in terms of how he has used tariffs to negotiate with our neighbors and also with Colombia. It's not been successful yet with China, unfortunately, but that's more of an enmity that we have going on there anyway.
It is more of an enmity. It is also, of course, a much bigger economic power, and so the risks, I think, are higher with China. China tariffs, if they really begin to bite, would have very dramatic effects because of the amount that the United States imports from China. There are obvious dangers in that, and there are dangers, I think, in this sense that is now building of, oh, well, Trump's just using it as a negotiating tactic. The more that becomes clear, the less effective it appears likely to be to me, because you're essentially saying, I'm trying to call your bluff. And once it becomes known that you're trying to call people's bluff, it becomes less effective. So I think that is the primary danger in all of this. Yes, I would agree with you that it has not been unsuccessful so far, although I think its successes have been exaggerated by the Trump side. But I do think there are really serious questions around it going forward.
We'll be back with more Rising right after this. There have been quite a few stunning moves in the media industry lately. The latest is Lara Trump, President Donald Trump's daughter-in-law, will be hosting a show on Fox News starting February 22nd, something the New York Times first reported.
Lara Trump's show will air on weekends at 9 p.m. It will be titled My View with Lara Trump. The show will be a mix of analysis and interviews with high-profile people. As many are pointing out, this marks the first time the relative of a sitting president is getting a show on a high-level news network.
CEO of Fox News Media, Suzanne Scott, said on Wednesday, a gifted communicator who knows how to connect to the viewers, successful entrepreneur, and working mother, Lara's innate understanding of the American public and today's political landscape will be a compelling addition to our weekend lineup.
Lara Trump was a paid contributor for Fox in 2021. Then, in 2022, the network said it did not want to employ someone connected to a presidential campaign, so they let her go.
Lara Trump then became the co-chair of the RNC in 2024, but she resigned from that position in December. Lara Trump had considered taking over Marco Rubio's vacant Senate spot after he became the Secretary of State nominee, but she ultimately decided to remove her hat from the ring.
Podcast host Brian Krasenstein wrote on X, imagine the MAGA outrage if MSNBC were to pay Hunter Biden for a primetime show during Biden's presidency. Senior fellow at Media Matters, Matthew Gertz, said Donald Trump's daughter-in-law goes from Fox contributor to RNC chair to Fox host. You really can't think of the network as independent from the White House in any way right now.
Meanwhile, comedian Terrence Williams wrote, "Let's go! Lara Trump was just hired as a Fox News host. She will be better than the ladies at The View. She deserves this more than anyone. She fought so hard for election integrity and played a crucial role in helping President Trump win." Florida GOP Chairman Evan Power said, awesome news, Lara Trump was a rock star for the RNC.
Oh, well, Robby, we're going to disagree on this one, I think.
You're not happy about this one.
State TV under private ownership, having the president's daughter-in-law at the microphone hosting a show. I mean, conservatives would be rightly up in arms if Hunter Biden was indeed the MSNBC host during the Biden era. I just think it's pretty bad. I mean, they couldn't find anyone else really to at least give a semblance of independence. They had to choose an actual member of Trump's family.
I mean, look, I don't think anyone is naive enough to think they're going to be tuning into that show for objective analysis of what the Trump administration is doing, but she is a talented media personality. She's been a Fox contributor before. You tune in for her perspective. I I frankly don't have a problem with it. I mean, the Hunter Biden thing is because
You have
Hunter
a
Biden
problem
was
with
a
Hunter
criminal.
Biden thing?
He's a criminal.
Well, what about if there were a member of
I mean, I don't even have that much
of... if Malia Obama had a show during Barack Obama's presidency, if she were old enough?
Jen Psaki has a show, and she's as biased in favor of the administration as anyone.
Yeah, but why...
So it doesn't...
But then why do you have a problem
I don't
with...
even want to talk about the Cuomo's. Cuomo is doing very interesting things as part of our network now, and I really like his interviews and I like his show, but that was still an issue when he was on CNN. And his brother was the governor.
But if you acknowledge the difficulty with those instances, particularly Psaki, Simone Sanders is also on MSNBC, a former Biden administration spokesperson, why are you fine with Lara Trump when the person is actually serving in office and she's going to be a network host?
I feel like the construction of the show is what matters. This is going to be a late night. Well, this is going to be a late night weekend MAGA entertainment type thing, whereas the other people we're discussing are supposed to be objective news commentator, like covering the news, not doing a kind of conservative equivalent lifestyle channel on the weekend.
I think that's, with all due respect, a very bizarre distinction to make. You think that Jen
news versus opinion
Psaki,
distinction?
a former White House press secretary, you think is posing as the news?
I think she's holding...
But you think Lara Trump, the sitting president's daughter-in-law, is fine because she's entertaining?
No, I think it's yes, absolutely. I think it's the assumption baked into the show. I think, and Fox does this much more clearly, delineates between news programming and when news programming ends and opinion programming takes over. They have a clear line. That line is not clear at all on CNN or MSNBC. They're portraying themselves as objective news commentators at the same time hiring people who were at the highest levels engaged in manufacturing propaganda for the Democratic Party. So I do see it a little bit differently.
No, I don't see it differently at all. I think that Fox News is welcome to program whoever they wish, as is MSNBC.
Well, people are welcome to criticize it too if they want.
But the point is that to suggest that Lara Trump would be hired and in that position if she were not the daughter-in-law of a sitting president with whom they know they have to cater favor with their own viewership is, I think, very important. I mean, the whole Dominion lawsuit thing was about Fox deciding it was not useful to them to back legitimate journalistic inquiry because it was losing them too many viewers, and therefore they had to back fraudulent claims and defamatory claims, as it turned out, of malfeasance to stay in with their viewers.
I say this all the time. No media company gets anywhere by routinely thumbing its nose at its viewers. And it is the viewers who want. It's the viewers who want Lara Trump. I also don't believe this is an attempt by the network to get in good with Trump or something, or to leverage Trump. It's because the viewers love Trump, and they love Trump's family, and they love Lara Trump, and they want more of her, and they enjoy her commentary, so they're giving her a show. I mean, that's the decision. It's a business decision. The viewers like this person. They want to hear more from her, and so they're giving her a show on the weekends.
You may have forgotten about this, as I had until I was researching this topic, but when Hillary Clinton was Secretary of State, NBC employed Chelsea Clinton as a special correspondent at about $600,000 a year, reportedly. Do you think that was because the NBC audience was craving Chelsea Clinton's television reporting?
I don't know why. That's probably an example of insider connection-y type stuff, more so than this. That's probably...
It's done to placate or to ingratiate oneself with the Clintons, but not to ingratiate oneself with the Trumps.
Probably, yeah.
That's a very consistent position.
Well, no, it's the difference of what the audience wants. I have no doubt that the viewers want commentary from Lara Trump. I mean, they do. They love her. She's great. She's very popular among conservative figures. They want a show with her. That's what they're asking for. I don't think that was the case with Chelsea Clinton. It was being like, we need special correspondent Chelsea Clinton.
Yeah.
I'm not even sure I cared about that all that much anyway. I mean, the scions of politicians have to do some kind of job. Now, there is tons of nepotism in journalism and in the media. There's so many people behind the scenes in editor roles who are they have famous last names. It's a routine thing. I just don't care that much.
Well, I think it is a bit different when the last name in question is Trump, and that's also the name of the sitting president. Yeah. We shall agree to disagree.
You and I got where we were by no famous connections.
Sweat and blood and tears alone.
No suaves and
there are Stanages. There certainly are not.
Powerful political positions.
There are not.
So That does it for us today on Rising. Please be sure to like, share, and subscribe so you never miss any content. And for those of you who like to listen while on the go, we're now available anywhere you can find podcasts. See you later.